The ocean is not empty. That is the first truth humanity learned, and then spent centuries trying to forget. We draw maps, we name currents, we measure depth in neat, comforting numbers. But beneath those numbers, something moves. The ocean is not a place, it is a presence. A vast, breathing body that tolerates us only at its surface. And if you stare too long into the dark water, if you lower your nets too deep, the ocean notices you. For most of human history, the sea was not a boundary, it was a warning. Sailors did not speak of it casually. They spoke in fragments, in glances, in lowered voices long after the waves had gone quiet. They knew something lived below. Not gods, not demons, something older, something immense. Long before sonar, before satellites, before steel hulls and engines powerful enough to tear through storms, there were ships made of wood, and men who trusted their lives to wind, rope, and stars. When those men returned, changed, or did not return at all, stories began to form. Stories of arms rising from the deep, of ships caught not by storms, but by something that pulled with intention. They gave it a name, Kraken. The name itself was never meant to describe a monster. It was a warning word, a sound meant to stop conversation, to end arguments. In the old Norse tongues, the Kraken was not a creature you fought. It was something you encountered once and never escaped twice. The earliest accounts do not describe roaring attacks or dramatic battles. They describe silence. A sea that suddenly went still. Waves flattening as if pressed down by invisible hands. The feeling that the ocean itself had grown heavier. Then the water would begin to move. Not splashing, not churning, rising. Fishermen wrote of dark shapes just beneath the surface, so large they mistook them for islands. Some anchored beside them, believing they had found land. Those men did not come back. Others did return, and when they did, they spoke of the same details. Massive arms, longer than masts, thicker than tree trunks, covered with pale discs that clung and did not let go. Suction marks were found burned into wood, perfect circles, too precise to be the work of waves. Ships were discovered drifting days later, sails intact, cargo untouched, no sign of battle, only damage. Hull planks bent inward, masts snapped, not broken by wind, but crushed, and in some cases, deep gouges, as if something with unimaginable strength had tested the ship and found it fragile. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as fear, as superstition born from exhaustion and alcohol and long nights at sea. And that dismissal made sense, because the ocean was unknowable, and humans fear what they cannot explain. So the Kraken was filed away with sea serpents and dragons, a myth, a story to frighten children and inexperienced sailors. But something strange happened as science advanced. The more we learned about the ocean, the larger the unknown became. By the 19th century, ships grew stronger. Iron replaced wood, steam replaced sail, and yet the encounters did not stop. In 1873, fishermen off the coast of Newfoundland hauled in something that did not belong in daylight. A massive tentacle, pale pink, covered with suckers rimmed with serrated hooks. It was real, it was physical, and it did not resemble any known animal. Scientists were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Giant squids existed. Creatures longer than whales, with eyes the size of dinner plates, living at depths where sunlight has never reached. For the first time, myth and biology touched. But even then, science drew a careful line. Yes, giant squids were real, but they were rare, elusive, shy. They did not attack ships, they did not rise to the surface. And yet, the old accounts described something more. Not a single animal drifting alone in darkness, but an intelligence. Something that chose when to rise. Something that interacted with ships, not as prey, but as obstacles. Sailors described tentacles moving independently, coordinated, deliberate. They described eyes, not animal panic, but awareness. An understanding that something small and fragile had entered a domain it did not control. By the early 20th century, sonar technology began to map the ocean floor, and with it came anomalies, massive moving shapes appearing briefly, then vanishing. Too large to be schools of fish, too slow to be currents, too inconsistent to be errors. They were recorded and quietly ignored, because the truth was unsettling. If something like the Kraken existed, then it had never disappeared. It had simply stayed where humans could not follow, below the reach of light, below the reach of sound, below the reach of certainty. And as our ships grew louder, faster, and more invasive, the deep grew quieter. Not empty, quiet. As if something had learned that remaining unseen was the safest way to survive.
For a long time, science believed that the ocean followed rules we could eventually master. That with enough data, enough machines, and enough patience, every mystery would collapse into clarity. The Kraken refused to cooperate. When the first confirmed remains of giant squids were brought to the surface, they did not arrive alive. They arrived damaged, broken, often half-digested. Whales' stomachs told the story long before cameras could. Inside them, researchers found tentacles, hooks, fragments of arms thicker than a man's torso. These were not small animals hiding in cracks. These were apex creatures living far below the reach of light. The anatomy of the giant squid was unlike anything humans were prepared to accept. Its nervous system was decentralized, each arm capable of independent action, each sucker able to taste, grip, and decide. This was not a simple animal. Its eyes alone challenged our assumptions. The largest eyes ever evolved on Earth, designed not to see beauty, but movement, designed to detect the faintest shadow passing above, the silhouette of a whale or a ship. At depths where pressure would crush steel, these creatures thrived. Where sound traveled faster and farther than sight, they listened. The ocean is not silent at depth. It hums, it groans, it carries vibrations across miles. And the Kraken, if it exists, would hear everything. Submarines learned this lesson early. In the mid-20th century, naval crews reported strange resistance while moving through deep waters. Not collisions, not currents, pressure, as if something large had brushed against the hull, then let go. Sonar operators occasionally detected massive returns that did not match known life forms, too solid to be plankton, too fluid to be rock. These contacts appeared briefly, then vanished. Classified reports labeled them as biological interference, equipment malfunction, operator error. But the patterns repeated, and patterns are difficult to ignore. The deeper humans went, the less confident their explanations became. Deep-sea exploration revealed something unsettling. The ocean floor is scarred. Long, parallel grooves stretch across sediment plains, marks too wide to be made by currents, too precise to be random collapse. Some resembled drag marks, as if something enormous had rested, then moved on. Marine biologists began to understand a difficult truth. The deep ocean is not sparsely populated, it is sparsely observed. Less than 5% of the ocean has been visually explored. We know more about the surface of the moon than the trenches beneath our own seas. And giant squids, once thought mythical, became accepted fact only because they occasionally died at the surface. Alive, they remained unseen. This created an uncomfortable question. If a creature that large could exist unnoticed for centuries, what else could exist alongside it? Sailor accounts described something larger than known squids, arms that did not merely grasp, but enveloped. Descriptions spoke of bodies wider than ships, of tentacles numbering more than 8 or 10, of a mass that displaced water like a rising continent. Scientists dismissed these details as exaggeration, but fear has a strange way of sharpening memory. The Kraken in these stories did not behave like an animal defending itself. It did not flee. It did not panic. It acted with intention. Ships were not bitten in half. They were held, pulled downward, as if tested. Modern footage has shown giant squids displaying curiosity towards submersibles, approaching lights, touching glass with deliberate pressure, not attacking, inspecting. When disturbed, they retreat with speed and precision that suggests awareness, not instinct. This behavior unsettles researchers more than aggression ever could. Predators that attack are predictable. Predators that observe are not. The Kraken legend may have grown from this misunderstanding. Early sailors encountered a deep-sea intelligence responding to intrusion. They lacked the language to describe decentralized brains, to describe creatures whose intelligence was spread across limbs. So they described what they felt: a presence, a will, the ocean reacting. As technology advanced, encounters decreased, not because the deep became empty, but because we became louder. Engines replaced sails, sonar replaced silence, metal replaced wood. The ocean adapted. Creatures that survived for millions of years did not do so by confrontation. They did so by avoidance, remaining below, remaining patient, remaining unseen. And so, the Kraken faded from history, not because it died, but because it learned. Learned that humans forget what they cannot see, learned that myths are safer than evidence, and perhaps that the surface is not worth defending. Not yet.
Modern technology was supposed to end the age of legends. Satellites watch the oceans from above, sensors listen from below. Nothing, we believed, could move without being seen. The Kraken did not disappear. It simply moved into the margins of our instruments. Deep-sea sonar is not vision, it is interpretation. Sound travels through water, strikes an object, and returns as data. That data must be translated, filtered, explained, and sometimes dismissed. In the late 20th century, research vessels began reporting sonar returns that did not behave like known life. Massive shapes, slow-moving, changing orientation without changing speed. Too large to be schools of fish, too soft to be rock, too deliberate to be noise. These contacts would appear for seconds, sometimes minutes, then fade as if the object had turned away. Crews logged them, flagged them, and moved on, because acknowledging them meant asking questions no one wanted to answer. At extreme depths, pressure warps perception. Distances compress. Objects seem closer or larger than they truly are. This explanation is comforting, until patterns emerge. In several regions of the world, deep-sea cables have been damaged in ways that defy geology. Not snapped cleanly by tectonic movement, not abraded by currents. Crushed, bent, dragged. Cables thicker than a human arm, designed to withstand decades under pressure. Engineers blamed undersea landslides, anchors, rare events. But these explanations began to overlap with something else. Disappearances. Unmanned submersibles lost contact in calm conditions. research drones descending into trenches, sending data, then nothing. No implosion signature, no debris field, just silence. In a few cases, fragments were recovered. Pressure housings distorted inward, but not evenly, scratched, marked, as if something had wrapped around them. Official reports avoid speculation, they always do. But privately, researchers speak differently. They talk about the limits of observation, about blind zones beneath thermal layers, about regions where sonar returns become unreliable, places where something large could exist and never be seen. The Kraken legend described an animal that rose only when it chose to, not to feed, not to hunt, but to interact, to remove obstacles, to correct intrusion. Modern encounters follow the same pattern. There are no recorded attacks on surface vessels in the age of steel, no dramatic tentacles tearing ships apart. Instead, there is absence, silence where signals should be, gaps where machines were expected to return. The deep does not announce itself, it erases. Giant squids today are known to engage with whales in combat. Their scars are visible on sperm whale skin, circular marks, perfectly spaced. Battles fought in darkness, at depths where no human has ever watched. If these animals can challenge whales, then size alone no longer protects us. And if the Kraken legend represents something larger still, something older, then perhaps restraint is its greatest adaptation. There is no advantage in revealing itself. The surface is noisy, violent, temporary. Below, time moves differently. A creature living in the deep does not measure life in years. It measures it in currents, in migrations, in epochs. Some marine biologists quietly speculate that deep-sea intelligence may not resemble anything familiar, that survival at extreme depth favors patience over aggression, observation over reaction. A kraken, if real, would not behave like a monster from stories. It would behave like a guardian of territory too vast to defend actively. It would intervene only when necessary, when cables cross sensitive regions, when machines descend too far, when the noise becomes unbearable, and when the disturbance ends, it would withdraw, leaving behind questions and nothing else. Humans search the ocean for certainty, but certainty does not exist there, only probability. And probability suggests that in a world where giant squids remained hidden for centuries, something even larger could remain hidden still, not because it is rare, but because it is careful. And the deeper we go, the more careful we must become, because the ocean is not waiting to be discovered. It is waiting to be respected.
At some point, the line between legend and evidence becomes difficult to see. Not because the legend grows stronger, but because the evidence refuses to be complete. The Kraken survived for centuries not as a creature, but as a pattern, a repetition of absence, a shape defined by what remained unexplained. Every culture that depended on the sea developed its own version, different names, different details, but the same core fear. Something vast, something hidden, something that did not need to announce itself. In Scandinavian waters, fishermen spoke of a presence that caused the sea to rise unnaturally, as if something beneath it displaced enormous volume. In the Mediterranean, sailors described sudden loss of control, oars pulled from hands by invisible force. In the South Pacific, stories emerged of long arms reaching from below, not striking, but holding ships in place until the sea reclaimed them. These stories emerged independently, separated by centuries, separated by oceans, yet they described the same behavior. Not attack, control. This distinction matters.
Predators attack to survive. But control implies awareness. It implies choice. As science expanded, researchers attempted to reconstruct what such a creature would require to exist. It would need a metabolism capable of long periods of inactivity, a body flexible enough to withstand crushing pressure, a nervous system that could function without centralized control. It would need patience. Giant squids already meet many of these conditions. Their muscles function efficiently in cold environments. Their blood chemistry allows oxygen transport at extreme depths. Their decentralized nervous system allows complex movement without conscious coordination. If evolution pushed further along this path, size would not be a limitation. The deep sea does not punish size. It punishes fragility. Large creatures conserve energy. They move rarely. They act deliberately. This is why whales thrive, and why something even larger could remain unseen. The Kraken legend may not describe a single species. It may describe a class of organisms. Rare, long-lived, slow to reproduce. Creatures for whom contact with humans is neither threat nor opportunity, only disturbance. This reframes the myth entirely. The Kraken was never hunting ships. It was removing irritants from its environment. Wooden hulls, anchors, nets, human noise. When ships disappeared, they were not destroyed in rage. They were silenced. As industrialization spread, encounters declined. Not because the Kraken vanished, but because it adapted. Deep-sea animals are masters of avoidance. They evolved beneath predators they could not outrun. They survived by becoming invisible, remaining below thermoclines, below light, below sound. And humans helped. We labeled the deep as empty, too hostile to support large life, too cold, too dark. This assumption was convenient. It allowed us to ignore the spaces we could not control. But assumptions are fragile. Every time a giant squid washes ashore, perfectly preserved eyes staring upward, the myth breathes again. Every time a deep-sea drone captures a shape just beyond clarity, the questions return. Not loudly, quietly. Because the Kraken does not demand belief. It survives on doubt. It exists in the margins of our confidence, in the gaps between data points, in the places where science ends its sentences with words like unknown and unverified. And perhaps that is where it belongs, not as a monster to be proven or disproven, but as a reminder that humanity has not conquered the ocean, that intelligence does not require similarity, that dominance does not require visibility. The Kraken legend endures because it reflects a truth we struggle to accept. We are not the final chapter of life on this planet. We are not the largest intelligence. We are not the deepest. And as long as the ocean remains vast, as long as trenches descend beyond reach, as long as sound returns distorted and incomplete, there will always be something below us, watching, waiting, not to rise, but to remain.
In the end, the most unsettling thing about the Kraken is not whether it exists, it is that we cannot prove it does not. Science is built on observation, on repetition, on evidence that can be measured, recorded, and verified. But the deep ocean does not offer itself willingly. It hides behind pressure, behind darkness, behind distances so vast that even our most advanced machines hesitate. What we know about the deep is not knowledge, it is sampling, moments, fragments, brief intrusions into an environment that immediately closes behind us. When a submersible descends,
It does not enter a neutral space, it enters a foreign one. Lights cut through darkness that has not been disturbed for centuries. Engines vibrate through water that carries sound farther than air ever could. Everything down there notices. And if something vast exists in that environment, it does not experience our presence as discovery. It experiences it as noise. The Kraken legend does not describe rage. It does not describe pursuit. It describes correction, a sudden stillness, a removal, a return to quiet. This is why the legend never ends with victory. There are no heroes who defeat the Kraken, no trophies brought home, only ships that vanish, only journeys that do not continue. That detail matters, because legends usually exaggerate triumph. They celebrate survival. The Kraken stories do not. They end abruptly, mid-sentence, mid-voyage, as if the story itself was interrupted. Modern humans like to believe that knowledge equals safety, that what we can name, we can control. But the ocean does not respond to names. It responds to balance. The deep sea is not hostile. It is indifferent. It does not hate us. It does not welcome us. It simply exists on timescales we struggle to comprehend. A creature like the Kraken, if real, would not measure life in decades. It would measure it in geological shifts, in changing currents, in the slow migration of continents. Human history would barely register. This is why the question of the Kraken's existence feels so uncomfortable. Because if it exists, then it has always existed alongside us, watching ships evolve from wood to steel, listening as sails gave way to engines, observing as sonar began to pierce the dark, and still choosing silence. Perhaps that silence is not absence, it is judgment. Not moral judgment, but environmental, a calculation of risk and reward. And so far, the surface has not been worth rising for. Every generation believes it will be the one to uncover the final truth, the one to illuminate the last dark place, but the ocean has taught us a different lesson. Some truths are not hidden because they are rare, they are hidden because they are patient. The Kraken does not need belief to survive. It does not need fear. It needs depth, and depth is something humanity has barely begun to understand. So the next time you look at the sea and see only waves, remember this. Below the surface is a world that does not belong to us, a world that does not explain itself, a world that has learned how to remain unseen. And whether the Kraken is a creature of flesh or a name given to something larger, something older, the ocean keeps its secrets, not because it wants us to frighten us, but because it does not need us to know.